Thanks for joining us, Gale.
Good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
And you just, in the first couple of words, you can hear that my friend has got a voice for radio. And even though you're the chairman of the board of one of the biggest energy companies in the country, you did radio.
I did radio, worked my way through college as a newscaster, actually.
Right.
So it was a great experience. Really enjoyed it. Worked at WOKY back in the heyday.
Great. Yeah.
So it was a really fun experience, and always fun to get back to my roots.
It's interesting. I think you might have to be of a certain age to even know WOKY, but you and I both know it. And you're still doing radio, as a matter of fact. You've done some things regarding the Milwaukee Bucks.
Well, I've been fortunate to be able to host a courtside show, mostly with Coach Bud,
right.
But with all other Bucks. It's a weekly show, actually here on TMJ,
right.
during the season.
I see Coach Bud from time to time. He likes to play golf, and so I see him at the court. But from time to time, does he ask you what you think about trades and in playing time of players?
I've tried to give him my input, and he's polite about it.
He is polite about it, yeah. Congratulations. You have an ownership interest in the Milwaukee Bucks, and you got a ring.
I got a ring. The ring is incredible.
Yeah.
It really is. I can't wear it because I'd have a lost time injury.
It
is so big and so heavy. It fits on Giannis's hand well. On mine, it's like holy cow.
Right.
But it's really a once in a lifetime experience. I hope we get more rings.
Yeah, that's
but it was
sure.
a terrific experience.
And I thought we were going to go back to back this year. Of course, Boston played great defense. Great story. I sit across the aisle from Senator Cole. And if you remember, when he got his ring, they went up into the stands to give him his ring. And I was standing literally this close to him. And unfortunately, they dropped it in the handoff. And,
oh, no.
And I said, Senator, I might be faster than you. And he said, pick it up. But he thought that was funny. But let's change gears and talk about WEC Energy Group. You've been around a long time, graduate of 1972 of UWM.
Yes.
Excellent. There are so many people that are concerned about a report that came out from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission called FERC, and I'm sure you've read it.
Absolutely. The report caused a lot of stir and got a lot of media attention and obviously a lot of consumer concern.
Right.
And really what the report said was, particularly this summer, if there are way above average temperatures in parts of the middle western section of the country, and if there are unplanned plant outages, at the same time we might have extreme temperatures, then things could get a bit dicey in terms of reliability of the supply of electricity.
So let's talk about that. A bit dicey.
A bit dicey meaning there might be a need for conservation. There might be a need to interrupt some interruptible industrial customers. We haven't had to do that in a long time. But Dave, I think there are probably three factors that led to that warning, if you will. And if I could, it might be helpful for your listeners to just get a level set on how the power market works.
Sure, that'd be great.
So these days, very different from 15 or 20 years ago, the country is divided up into big power markets. And those power markets are run by independent operators. Every company like ours that owns and operates power generation plants basically tells the Midwest grid operator, in this case, before every day what plants we have available. The Midwest grid operator, under federal law, is responsible for keeping the lights on in a broad swath of the country, in this case the Midwest. And the Midwest grid operator tells us what plants to run and at what level. And that theoretically guarantees customers to get the hourly price as best and as cheap as they can.
Got it.
So the most efficient plants run at the maximum level on any given day. When it's summertime, hot temperatures, and if there are unplanned power plant outages, then you have a tight supply. We have had a day already at 100 degrees in Milwaukee. In our case, Dave, I can honestly say we've planned well. But there's a lesson here that I think is very important as we look to the future, and that is that there is no perfect fuel source. And what has served customers best over time is to have a diverse supply of fuels for power plants, ranging from coal to natural gas to hydro to biomass to solar to wind. And we have that diversity of supply right now. It has served our customers in Wisconsin particularly well. And I can give you an example. A year ago, February, President's Day weekend, we had a polar vortex event. Now, normally, Dave, you only have to worry about power supply being tight in the summertime. But it got to minus 42 degrees, and Dave, before the wind chill, minus 42 degrees in northern Wisconsin. Never got above zero in some parts of our service area for an entire week. And it took everything we had, every fuel source, every power plant we had to keep the lights on. And as you recall, that very same weekend, the energy system in Texas failed.
Yep.
But here, as you've pointed out, it's a matter of life and death at times.
Right.
So reliability is really important to us, and having that diverse supply, I think, is really a differentiator for us and has helped us stay reliable for customers when they need it the most.
You know, there's been a lot of talk, especially by ESG investors, that they want to go to green. But the argument in the investment world is there a step between here and green, maybe something that's brown, if you will? What is the feeling, from you at least, of taking that first step?
Well, I think you're making a great point. There's no turning back on decarbonization.
Right.
In other words, the goals that are being set by countries and governments and companies around the world to basically reduce dramatically the carbon emissions into the environment, those goals are going to have to be met. To do so, though, and keep costs affordable, keep the system reliable, and continue to get cleaner, we need advances in technology. Now, having said that, we have set one of the most aggressive goals in our industry for carbon reduction. We expect, and we have an operating plan to do this, we expect to have about a 60% reduction in CO2 emissions by the end of 2025.
That's amazing.
And an 80% reduction by the end of 2030. We believe we can do that without major advances in technology. But to get well beyond that 80% reduction is going to require advances in technology. There's a lot of work going on. An example, battery technology. It is very difficult to store much electricity today. Mm-hmm. Usually it has to be generated at the point of demand. But today you can install utility-scale batteries that can give you 4 hours of energy. But 4 hours won't get you through a polar vortex.
Right.
Advances in battery technology that could be much longer duration batteries, that could help. There's a lot of research going on carbon capture, which could allow coal-fired power plants to operate without CO2 emissions. So there's a lot of work going on, but the transition, Dave, is not going to be in a straight line.
Right.
The transition is going to be up and down, and we have to, and I think we're learning this with just the war in Ukraine, if you will.
Right.
Energy can be a weapon against society, against the West. And we simply have to approach this in an intelligent way. I think we can do both. I think we can get to an 80% or better reduction in CO2 emissions, stay affordable, and stay reliable. But we have to be sensible about the transition.
And do it in a path forward.
Exactly.
And in steps, right? And,
exactly.
You know, you said so many great things there. Let me just get backtrack on one of those things, and that's battery technology. I don't want to get too far afield. It's just we're just chatting here. But a lot of that is commodity related. And you mentioned the Russia-Ukraine issue and what Russia's using it as a weapon. But to get better battery technology, there is more pressure on commodities.
Yes.
And we're starting to see that even from the EV makers.
You are correct. And one of the downsides is that a huge percentage of the minerals that are needed for expanded battery production really come from China and other parts of the world, not the United States.
Right.
So as you say, there has to be a transition. It has to make sense. We cannot, in my opinion, we cannot let up on our focus on reliability and affordability. It's what fuels the American economy. It's what provides jobs. It's what keeps this economy among the strongest in the world. We're very focused on making sure that, yes, we make progress, but as you say, in important steps, and do so while maintaining the record of outstanding reliability.
And you have outstanding reliability. In fact, one of the best run utilities in the country, and you know that, and you can speak to that because other organizations have pointed that out. But let me go back to really $1 million question, if you will. A lot of people, when they heard brownouts and blackouts, they freak out. Right?
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. But I think it would be fair for the listeners to understand that you have agreements with industrial users. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be really good for people to hear that.
Yeah, it's a great point, Dave. So we serve electricity and natural gas to most all of the major industrial manufacturing companies in Wisconsin. Many of them have signed up to what we call our interruptible rate. Yep. And what that really means is they get a price break for us to have the ability to call on them to either shut down or materially reduce their energy use if we get into an emergency situation. Now, the good news is we haven't had to do that in years. But that would be the next step. If, back to your first question regarding the warning about tight supplies in the Midwest this summer, if things got a little tight and there was a real concern about having enough energy demand in a given hour, that's the first step we would take.
So you would go to whomever the industrial consumer is, the paper mill, whomever it is.
We might even go to Annex Wealth Management.
We don't use that much other than the computers that our clients are using. But you go to whomever that industrial user is, and you say, we have made a deal with you to get a lower cost, and because of that, we're going to, not in 5 minutes, but maybe next week or tomorrow, we want to turn you off. Is that right?
That is correct. And we have a system in place of immediate communication with these customers, and we also can give them advanced warning. Because generally, the Midwest grid operator will know a day in advance, how hot the next day's temperatures are likely to be. And an important point here, which we wouldn't have talked about even 10 years ago, is how much wind is going to be blowing in the Midwest.
Right.
One of the sticking points, and look, we're big believers, again, in all of the above. So wind has an important part in our energy supply. So does solar. But I'll give you an example. There are about 25,000 megawatts of wind capability in the giant Midwestern part of the country.
Okay.
That's about 4 times the size of our own system. But just last week, for example, that went from the availability, because of lack of wind, went from that 25,000 megawatts to 5,000 megawatts overnight. We have to find in the Midwest, there has to be something else that you can actually count on to make up that slack.
In this last bit that we were talking about, we said there could be brownouts and blackouts, and we said that it could be industrial users. But what people hear are people, for example, in communities, in inner cities, that without power, it really is a matter of life and death, and it could be dramatic and traumatic. What would it take for the energy company to get to the consumer level to turn off power?
It would take a condition very extreme this summer.
Right.
And I'll give you just a theoretical example. Let's say that in northern Wisconsin, the temperature got to 103 degrees, and there were 7 or 8 power plants around the Midwest that suddenly had outages that weren't planned. That's the kind of thing that could be an extraordinary circumstance that could result in some interruption of customers. We don't see that happening.
Right.
We think we're in pretty good shape.
And we're prepared for it.
And we're prepared for it. Right. We really are. In fact, probably what's more likely is a summer storm with huge winds, that takes out a few 100,000 customers until we can repair the distribution network. We actually have had some storms in June where we had a lot of customers offline, but we've repaired the system. Everybody's back.
So you're talking about northern Wisconsin. So Wisconsin Energy isn't just in Wisconsin. You also have distribution in northern Michigan.
We have electric distribution in northern Michigan. We sure do. We also are the gas distribution company in the city of Chicago, in the Chicago suburbs, the northern Chicago suburbs. We supply customers with natural gas in western Michigan and all over the state of Minnesota.
Right.
So we're one of the, as you probably are aware, we're one of the 10 largest publicly traded utility networks in the country.
And by the way, I don't want to get into compliance issues, but the stock is trading great, low PE, great dividend, and you're probably very proud of that.
Well, we've been pleased. Our folks have really built a great track record. In fact, in this inflationary environment, we were able to raise our dividend by 7.4% in January, and that's the 18th consecutive year of dividend increases.
That's a dividend grower. We call them aristocrats. We talk about maybe a storm taking us out, but there is also actually cybersecurity issues that you have to be concerned about at a very high level. Is there anything that you can publicly talk about?
What I can say, and we are, let me first say, we are spending millions of dollars a year on cybersecurity and cyber protection. That's not unusual for a large company these days, but I will say this, the cooperation between our industry and Homeland Security, the FBI, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I have been amazed, positively so, about the cooperation and the information flow. Early on, a number of years ago, the federal government designated the utility industry as one of the critical infrastructure industries. And there's a coordinating group set up in Washington And oftentimes, as you know, these government agencies are slow to react, and it's not necessarily a positive experience.
Right.
This has been a positive experience.
Yep.
The information flow is terrific. The advance warnings are terrific. And we really have to have that kind of cooperation with the federal government, because a company like ours simply is not privy to a lot of the threats and a lot of the foreign government threats related to cybersecurity. So I've been really pleased with this cooperation and this designation. It has given us a lot of really good information. It has helped us to prevent several attacks. But as you know, on a subject like this, you never rest easy.
Yeah, no question. In the securities business, and financial institutions do speak to it a lot, there are potential attackers on a daily basis. And it's everything from sending me your Social Security number to all of these crazy things. And so you cannot rest easy, and everyone is concerned. There was a 60 Minutes piece, you'll recall, several years ago that certainly got a lot of attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
There's also a big push, of course, to EV vehicles, and really we're having this conversation on the tail of the Tesla and Twitter conversation,
Yes.
But Elon Musk has got his hands full alone with EV production, much less getting into Twitter. But what happens if all these folks decide that, you could drive around and see more Teslas every day and more EV vehicles every day? What if they have to go home and plug in? I mean, that's going to further cause an issue, right?
Well, what it will do is require us to make a significant amount of additional investment.
Yep.
And let me give an example. We have a rough rule of thumb, and that is the addition to the consumer fleet of 2 electric vehicles would place additional demand on our system equivalent to 1 new household.
Wow.
So 2 new EVs, just a normal demand of charging,
Right.
equivalent to the entire energy use of 1 new household.
So if somebody puts 2 EVs in their garage, it's like having 3 houses.
It'd be like having another house.
My
That's exactly
goodness,
right.
wow.
So what would have to happen? Well, the distribution network, you see poles and transformers and lines coming into your home. That distribution network would have to be upgraded. We'd have to put in a larger transformer. We would have to definitely upgrade the distribution into that particular neighborhood.
Well, what would that take? I mean, EV is moving fast. We know that all of the automakers are moving fast to try to get this, and they even have some mandates, as a matter of fact, to do that.
That's correct.
Are the utilities keeping up or staying ahead of that?
We're certainly trying to. In fact, we have before our state regulator right now a plan that would cost over a number of years about $700 million to upgrade and harden the grid. Mm-hmm. Harden it for storms, but also upgrade the grid for the potential additional investments that need to be made to accommodate EV charging.
We're talking about a lot of different sources and inputs into energy. We kind of glossed over, but is an important idea, is nuclear power. What does that play in your future?
Well, that's a great question. I would say that as we think about the need to continue to decarbonize, that there may well be a role for nuclear power. 2 different possibilities. Today, we buy energy from a nuclear power plant that this company built in the 1970s called the Point Beach Nuclear Power Plant. We buy energy from that plant today. That plant is due to retire, the first unit in 2030, the second unit in 2033. So there's a possibility that the life of that plant, even though it's 60 years old at that point, there's a possibility that plant's life could be extended.
Mm-hmm. Governor's reprieve.
It could get exactly. Yeah, it might not get the death penalty. So we're working on that possibility right now. The second, little bit longer-term possibility is a new technology that are called SMRs, small modular reactors. These would be much, much smaller units that could be placed in many locations, but particularly on the site of an older power plant. They're modular, so they're smaller in terms of capacity. They're built off-site, so it's not like building a brand new huge structure on site. And the small nuclear reactor technology is really in the demonstration stage right now. So we'll see in the next 10 years or so if that technology, which would be carbon-free, could basically be economic and reliable. But that's something that we're all watching, something that we're looking at the demonstration information on, something that could be a part of the future.
And, the first thing that listeners might hear is what's the safety of that?
Right.
And I'm sure that's first and foremost with this conversation.
Oh, no question about that. Absolutely. And actually with the technology, as I understand it, with the small modular reactors, it would be even safer than the generation of plants that operate today.
We're all old enough to remember that issues in the past, and those are issues of the past as well. And
Yes.
I think the safety of those are really significantly better. I just have a couple more questions if you have another moment or so.
Sure.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about investing in energy because, obviously we are a wealth management firm. People look into energy, and it's not just energy utilities. Obviously, there's oil and everything that consolidators are doing these days. Any ideas about energy in general?
We look at energy in general as really starting with the infrastructure. And I think that's an important point, that you can drill all the oil you want,
right,
or you can find all the natural gas through fracking that you can find, but it has to be delivered to the end customer. And where I think there is both investment opportunity and societal need for customers going forward is really in continuing to advance and build modern infrastructure in this country. I mean, we talked about just what might need to happen to our distribution system for more EV charging. Mm-hmm. We're going to continue to need a growing amount of energy in this country. In fact, the energy economy of this country needs to be turned on again, not only for energy security and affordability here for customers in the U.S., but also, given what we're seeing in Europe and around the world, the U.S. can be a major player in political stability in the world by continuing to turn on our energy economy.
So you just said something really important. It says the political stability, and it's turned into politics. And I guess we can talk about politics without being partisan. You look at what happened when President Biden came in, and even, you can go all the way back to, I remember when President Obama was elected, he talked about being energy independent.
Right.
I think we're both saying the same things, that we need to do that in this country.
We do. Even if you look back at some of the policies and some of the speeches from President Obama, he was what I call an all-of-the-above guy.
Yep.
Again, we're not going to ignore the decarbonization trend. We're not going to stop reducing CO2 emissions. But we can do both in this country. We can have a robust energy supply, and we can continue to improve the environmental performance of the networks. But we have to do it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, that is really the key. This has been an amazing conversation, Mr. Klappa. Thank you for joining us. I know I'm really excited about the Milwaukee Bucks coming back, as I'm sure you are as well. And any insight Coach Bud has given you that you want to partake upon us at this point?
The only thing that I can tell you that is a direct quote from Coach Bud is he's excited about the roster. Yep. He's excited about the re-signing of some of the free agents. As he said to me, Gale, I really believe we can compete with the best.
Yeah.